Good morning. Come join me and let's read this book, Mother of Peace. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. A memoir of Dr. Hak Jahan Moon. I will read from the chapter Marriage Supper of the Lamb, page 67. She's actually in this picture. Marriage Supper of the Lamb. God is my Father. From the time I could understand words, my maternal grandmother Jo Wonmo consistently taught me one thing: God is your father. She went so far as to say, your mother is like your nanny who is raising you as God's daughter. Since I had been surrounded by an atmosphere of faith, even while in my mother's womb, I accepted it. I accepted this without a second thought. When I heard the word God, my heart would open unreservedly and fill with warmth. This is in 1956, together classmates from her art class in Song Jong Girls Middle School. Mother of Peace, page 68. My mother did not mind investing herself, body, and soul for the purpose of raising me to reject secular life and follow God's way. She lived with single minded devotion, in absolute unity with and obedience to God. After joining the Unification Church, our family moved to Seoul, where she worked even harder to protect me from the world's temptation. As a result of her dedication, God allowed me to see myself as a noble crane. Even as an adolescent in middle school, I poured my heart into quiet reading and study. I attended the Songjong Girls Middle School, located in Sajik-dong at Seoul's Dongno district, situated at the southern foot of Mount Inwang. It was a small school that seemed always bright, bathed in sunlight. From the moment of its founding, the school shared in the suffering of the Korean people. It was established in May 1950, but has to close less than a month later due to the Korean War. After the war, its doors reopened, and true to its mission, the school prepared many girls to become talented women who would help build a prosperous country. In 1981, the school moved to the Inpyeong district of Seoul, and in 1984, its name was changed to Sunjang Girls Middle School. Our Tongil group acquired the school in 1987 and brought it into the Sunhak Academy family. I have continued to give it support and attention. In middle school, I spoke little and developed a calm personality. I studied hard and always ranked at the top of my class. I was pretty and modest, and as I also quiet and well behaved, I received love and attention from my teachers. My school life was uneventful. I only remember that I missed a day or two of school in the first year when I became quite sick. In my second and third years, I received an award for earning the highest grades in my class. I preferred to read in a quiet spot and listen to music rather than engage in social life or sports. My hobby is drawing. I enjoyed art and had some talent, but that possi- set aside the possibility of becoming a professional artist. In the years For all 3 years of middle school, I was the class representative on the council in the student council. And in the third year, I was the head of the student activities committee. I led many student activities, and this awakened my leadership abilities. One day, I went to the podium and announced the decision of the student council. The teachers complimented me on my poise and confident attitude. After witnessing this side of me, which they had not seen before, the teachers commended, Hakja seems gifted. I thought she was just quiet and docile, but actually, she shows good leadership skills. During adolescence, I didn't worry about my life or losing my way. I credit this to my grandmother and mother instilling in me a deep faith in God and the habit of living in attendance to Him. My mother, in particular, strictly guided my life of faith. Yes, there were times when I thought it difficult and wearisome, but I am grateful now, for it prepared me to blossom as the only begotten daughter of God, who one day would meet the only begotten Son of God. Within that atmosphere, I grew roots of unshakable faith. I read a lot. I enjoyed reading tales of the saints and particularly The Good Earth by Pearl S. Buck. The characters in that book struggle against nature and fate. The story helped me realize that ultimately we must return to nature's embrace, represented in that book by the earth. It is human nature to cling to God's embrace. I earnestly wish to be together with God, and for that reason I devoured songs and novels about the love of one's hometown. I knew from a young age that God is my Father, and naturally connected everything I read to God. I cut off entirely from the harsh secular world and lived a chaste life as if I were a nun. I was aware that a higher power was guiding me, that my path had been prepared in heaven. Especially during this time, the Bible was my close companion. I cried myself to sleep many nights after reading about God's history of creation. The tragic fall and God's work of salvation carried out through historical figures who took responsibility at the behest of heaven. I learned how they sacrificed themselves and realized that God created us so He could love us as His children. After reading God's bitter history and His desire to embrace us, even though we gave Him only pain and sadness, it was not just once or twice that I lay awake, unable to sleep, my heart aching for Him. I naturally continued to ponder even more deeply what Teacher Moon had said to me about sacrifice. The question, what can I sacrifice for God, was shaping my life. Without sacrifice and service, we cannot even begin to think. One is living for the sake of others rather than for oneself. As I strictly cultivated my faith from a young age, I cherish a dream deep within my heart. That dream was to liberate my Heavenly Father, who throughout history gave Himself for the salvation of humanity. I wish for free to free him I wish to free him from the chains of our fallen history. We cannot meet God from a position of reigning over others. He finds us when we are silently working for the sake of those in greater difficulty than ourselves. I came to know that when we think about God's will from the lower position, the position of offering and self sacrifice, God's bitterness washes away and He will come to us. During the post war years, the soul were full of wounded. Numerous children, including war orphans, were suffering from hunger and disease. Few people were able to get timely treatment when they became sick. I wanted to heal people's injuries, relieve their pain, and guide them to a higher world. It, as it was time for me to enter high school, in the spring of 1959, I entered St. Joseph's Nursing School. Heavenly and earthly phoenixes. In the late 1950s, it wasn't easy for a single mother. My mother managed to make ends meet by doing many odd jobs that came her way. She did not rest even a moment in her devoted life of prayer. And in that way, she was triumph over those hardship and tribulation. One day, however, she announced to her small family, I've been living meaninglessly. I must live a life of greater value. That is her. Hakjahan, a student at St. Joseph Nursing School. This one. She left my maternal grandmother and in the care of my aunt and moved into the Chongpadong church and dedicated herself completely to church activities. She chose to take on the most menial of tasks. People will try to dissuade her, but she pursued such work with a joyful and grateful heart. She had lived a life of devoted faith in North Korea, greater than anyone, but started at the bottom in the Unification Church. She overworked herself, however, and her body grew weaker and weaker until she became seriously ill. Luckily, a church member she knew from the inside the womb church took her in. This person, Mrs. Oh Yong Chon, was like a sister to her. They lived together in the Noryangjin neighborhood. As they cared for each other, my mother gradually recovered her health. While at nursing school, I attended Chongpadong Church every Sunday. One day, my mother saw me there. She took me to a corner and softly whispered, a few nights ago, I had a dream that was hard to understand. What did you dream? I asked. There were women from church wearing white holy robes and standing there holding pink flowers, she said. Then I saw you walking toward Teacher Moon. At the time, we call Father Moon Teacher. All of a sudden, a thunder roared and lightning crashed from the sky and struck one spot. There you were, and the other women all look at you enviously. She paused, collecting her thoughts. That's when I woke up. I think it means that something will happen that will shake the world. I think so too, I replied. I'm sure it is a prophetic dream, but I don't want to guess more than that. My mother did not imagine what this dream was, a revelation from God, a prophecy that her only daughter would be called to become a true mother who would give her life for the world. But I had been thinking constantly about the word sacrifice and had determined to live a life of sacrifice for God. This dream fit with that, and I had a sense of its meaning. In the late autumn of 1959, Father Moon conducted a national missionary workshop at the Chongpadong Church, and I participated with my mother. I was on one side of the overcrowded church, busy with a workshop, but could see on the other side elder sisters were quietly working on another important matter. A few months earlier, senior grandmothers of deep faith had begun preparing for Father Moon's marriage. They were considering which among the women of the church would be God's choice to be his bride. As I was only a schoolgirl and so much younger than Father Moon, my name would not have come up. Then one day, one of the sages among the grandmothers sought out Father Moon to tell him about her dream. I saw many flocks of crane flying down from the heavens, she told him. And even though I kept trying to shoo them away, they came and covered Teacher Moon. Father Moon provided no interpretation, so the elder sister continued with confidence. I believe my dream is revealing God's will, that your bride's name will include a Chinese character for hak, meaning crane. Shortly after I heard that, my mother told me another revelation she had received in prayer. A phoenix flew down from heaven, and another flew up from the earth to meet it. The phoenix from heaven was Father Moon. It brought to her mind her dream from years before, when she went to Daegu to meet Father Moon, the dream in which the pair of golden dragons bowed down in the direction of Seoul. My mother thought about what all this might mean, and then one morning at dawn, she received a heavenly message. She had just taken a cold shower, and it came as she was reciting the pledge prayer. The phoenix descending from heaven represents the true Father, she announced, and the phoenix rising from the earth represents the true Mother. My mother was happy with this understanding, but she continued quietly with the workshop. She didn't speak about it. In the months following my 16th birthday, I matured quickly and it caught people's attention at church. Members would mention that I look elegant and neat. I would hear someone say, Hakja is peaceful and virtuous. She's like a crane, befitting her name. And another, she's also very polite. And if you watch, you will see she is very observant and has clear judgment. I stood out when I was with members of the congregation. People commented that I had an untainted purity, that I was one with God's will, and that I had embraced the virtue of obedience through the difficulties I had endured in North Korea. Hearing such comments, I disciplined myself not to feel proud or act carelessly. More than anything else, for this bride to be, Father Moon was looking for a person with a sacrificial and devoted heart of living for others. She did not care about family background, economic status, or appearance. She had to be a woman with absolute faith who would love the world. She had to be a woman who would conceive of saving the world. Because she had been unable to find such a woman, there had been no marriage of the Lamb. He still did not fully know that the heavenly bride, who would become the mother of heaven, earth, and humankind, was close by. I had come to understand God's will, but was not going to say anything. To recognize the bride was Father Moon's mission and responsibility. The heavenly bride. A short time later, Mrs. Oh Yong Chun, a devoted member who had taken in my mother, went to her job in a clothing store on the second floor of the Nakwon building in central Seoul. She assisted the store owner by making garments. The owner was a longtime member we call the prayer grandmother. When Mrs. O arrived, the owner was sewing together a man's suit. Mrs. O sat next to her as she pumped the wheel of the sewing machine and asked casually, Oh, who is the suit for? The suit is for Father Moon, was the grandmother's answer. He's going to wear it at his engagement ceremony. Mrs. O perked up immediately, and her eyes widened as she asked the natural question, Who is the bride? Well, replied the grandmother nonchalantly, the day of the engagement has been decided, but the bride hasn't been chosen yet. However, the ceremony is going to be held soon, so I am making his suit. Mrs. O's mind was buzzing. Who is going to be the bride? She pondered the question but couldn't come up with any possibilities. Mrs. O was a person who often heard God's voice in Revelation. In fact, she had been offering prayerful devotion for 7 years for the sake of the appearance of the true mother. She right away took her question to God in prayer, and she received a revelation. Because Eve fell when she was 16 years old, the heavenly bride needs to be younger than 20. This has never occurred to her before. It was only then that she understood the logic of God's will. She asked God again and again, "Who is the heavenly bride who is younger than 20?" And before long, she thought of me. "I know Hakja, who is around 16," she said to herself. "She often sits right next to me in the church. Why didn't I think of her? Could it be? Could it really be her?" At 10 a.m. that evening, Mrs. O was making her way home after finishing her work. She was on the Noryangjin bus as it was crossing the Han River when God spoke to her. "It will be Hakja. It will be Hakja." God's revelation descended upon Mrs. O like a wave of energy in the autumn night sky. She arrived in her neighborhood around 11 p.m. But instead of going home, she hurried to see my mother, who lived near her. "Sonne, are you sleeping?" "Not yet. Come in." "How old is your daughter?" My mother gave her a puzzled look. Mrs. O had skipped all formalities and asked a point-blank question. "Why are you visiting me in the middle of the night to ask me how old my daughter is?" "Don't change the subject. Please tell me." "She's turning 16. She's 16, turning 17 next year." "When is her birthday?" "She was born in 1943 on the 6th day of the first lunar month. She has the same birthday as our master. Why are you suddenly asking me such question?" Mrs. O and my mother were old friends. They were the same age, and they had attended the same church in their hometown in North Korea. In addition, their mothers were very close friends. My mother, in fact, was living in Noryangjin, across the street from Mrs. O. I had found this place for my mother when she had fallen into poor health while doing her church work. Just as abruptly as she had arrived, Mrs. O bid my mother good night and departed, leaving my mother to figure out what was on her mind. The next day, as soon as it became light, Mrs. O was on her way back to work at the Nakpong building. God's revelation about me completely distracted her, and the workday came and went without her realizing what she was doing. When she finished her work, she went directly to see a fortune teller. To this day, Koreans often consult fortune tellers for guidance about marriage, and that's what Mrs. O did. She described to the fortune teller the two persons about whom she was consulting without mentioning their names. Right away, the fortune teller's eyes widened. There may be a large gap between the ages of these two persons, but it doesn't matter. They are a match made in heaven. I have rarely seen such a couple whose fortunes are so aligned. Mrs. O felt her heart was about to explode. She calmed herself and went directly to the church to meet our teacher and tell him everything. As soon as she gained a private space with him, she blurted it out. "Hakjahan, the daughter of Hong Son E, is the heavenly bride." She waited for a response, but Father Moon didn't say a word. He had listened to many members suggest who might be the bride, and none of them had paid much attention to me. I did not worry about that. I kept my mind on heaven. I knew then and know now that a person's destiny is not contingent upon external evidence. God is the judge, and it is predestined that the only begotten son will marry the only begotten daughter prepared by God, and that is the hands of God. I knew it was Father Moon's mission and duty to recognize the only begotten daughter. I may have been young in years, but my heart toward God was unwavering. I waited for the time. One day, not long after that, hearing the sound of a magpie sitting on the branch of a tree outside the window of my dormitory room, I had a premonition that I was about to receive good news. I went to the window, opened it, looked up toward the sky. and I heard God's voice. Those were days in which God was giving me revelation not only in my dreams but also like waves coming down from the clear blue sky. I heard a word, "The time is near." It was the voice of God. I had heard it open since I was a child. I had always felt that I would meet a very precious person one day, as if someone were pushing me. I closed my books and left the dormitory. Something was telling me that my mother was not feeling well. As I was crossing the Han River on the bus, many thoughts flooded my mind. Does crossing the river mean that I am crossing over to a different world from the one in which I have been living? How many stories are embraced by the river, swirling beneath its confidently flowing surface? Is the heart of God who is searching for us like this river? I got off the bus and started walking up the Noryangjin Hill toward my house. As I climbed the slope, an unusually bright winter sun drew me onward in spite of the wind from the Han River blowing against my forehead. When my mother saw me, she did not seem as at all unwell. She looked rather excited and gratified to see me arrive. My confusion as to what drew me home dissipated right away as she held the door open and quickly put on her coat. I have received a message from the church. She told me we have to go there right now. To me, it was a given that the news was awaited us at the church. Whatever it might be, I had been prepared by God. The scene of my first meeting with Father Moon, which was just after I had finished elementary school, passed before me like a panoramic vision. I realized the dream I had after that meeting. Father Moon appeared in it with a young and gentle face, and I clearly heard God's revelation. Prepare, for the time is near. Recalling this strict command from heaven, walking toward the church, I surrendered myself completely, with a heart filled with trust in my Heavenly Father. Until now, I have lived according to your will. I said to Heavenly Parent in prayer, whatever be your will and providence, I am one with it already. Because I knew God's sorrowful grief, a courage based on my faith is in God rose up within me. I felt I could gratefully accept whatever might be asked of me. Then I heard God's voice again. I felt the same presence that I felt in the upper room of the inside the womb church when Grandmother Ho anointed me, when and when the monk passing by at our house had prophesied about me. Bathed in that presence, I heard the words, Mother of the universe, the time has come. It was like the sound of a gong over reverberating in the air. The voice spoke again. I am the Alpha and the Omega, and I have been waiting for the Mother of the universe since the creation of the world. When I heard those words, I knew what my future was to be, and it settled in my heart and created an ocean of calm. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve talked with God directly and heard God's words with their own ears. I had that much direct conversation with God from a young age. I continued walking, going to church while holding my mother's hand, as I had done so many times before. My mother and I arrived at the Chongpadong Church. It was February 26, 1960, a day when winter was withdrawing and spring was signaling its advent. Father Moon met with my mother and me all day in order to come to a conclusion about the Heavenly Bride. He and I talked about many things over the course of 9 hours. At his request, I drew him a picture. I spoke clearly as I answered his question about my hopes and aspiration. Remembering how Jacob received God's blessing at Bethel, I happily yet seriously said to him, I will bear many heavenly children. What God told Jacob at Bethel came to my mind, and thy seed shall be the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and in the end, in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. I determined that I would embrace all the people of the world and bring them new life as God's good children. When Isaac came up Mount Moriah with Abraham to offer a sacrifice, he asked his father where the offering was. Abraham answered that God had prepared a sacrifice and said nothing more. With that, Isaac, even at his young age, could understand the situation and realize that he was the sacrifice to be offered to heaven. Just as Isaac obediently lay upon the altar, I knew that God had prepared me as the heavenly bride, and that this was God's predestined providence. I had no question or doubt in my heart. I had only the desire to keep going on the path. I accepted God's command in a state of complete selflessness. On our way back home from this extraordinary day, my mother looked at me with warm eyes. You are usually so meek and calm. I didn't know you could be so bold. I reflected on the fact that the holy wedding is not based on how bold a person is in order to multiply God's lineage. The true mother has to bear many good children, and therefore she have to marry in her teens. Such a bride should be of a patriotic family. I realize as well with a life of faith inherited over 3 generations. 3 years before that, a number of single women believers had put themselves forward as marriage candidates before Father Moon. Several around the age of 30, in particular, had high hopes as Father Moon himself was nearing 40. Even in that circumstances, and having publicly announced the date of the holy wedding, Father Moon had maintained silence. He was waiting on heaven to decide who will be his bride. He knew that God is the one to prepare. Sorry for the interruption. I don't know what happened that this uh, reading was stopped. It was a really good story. I am. Thank you all for joining. I did not plan to speak. I just wanted to read and finish this. Oops. Thank you so much. Salamat sa pagsama ninyo, and I'll try to share this book, Mother of Peace, in another video. This is such an awesome book, and her life story can give us so much inspiration in life. If you can have the chance to read it, if you don't have the chance to read it,
please join me as I read this aloud. And thank you all for joining. I'll see you in the next. I'll try to continue and read this with you. God bless you. See you again soon. Bye.